And we're live on Facebook. Welcome to the groove. So I'm going to spin this down and welcome you, Jeremy, into the Zoom room. So Jeremy, to the people who are watching, Jeremy and I met on Facebook during level 4 lockdown. Like, we had some words in common, didn't we? We were using themes like rewild, and I was like, oh, I need to meet this man. So we met on Zoom, and we've just been kind of co-creating on Zoom to this point, and we don't know what's ahead, but we'll see what happens. Two like-minded people coming from very different places in life, but actually seeing kind of the world from quite similar lenses. So I guess, Jeremy, let's start with, who are you and what lights your fire?
Well, I'm a father, which is an incredibly defining description because it carries a responsibility for me to be the best version of myself. And I think I have an inherently restless nature. I don't do status quo well. So I've done a lot. I've crammed a lot into my life. I've spent time in the military. I spent time misbehaving. I've traveled a lot, particularly to really wild places like the mountains of Oman and the jungles of Central America, India. Um, I've been a bodyguard. I've been a farmer. I've been a professional mixed martial arts fighter. I am a poet. I published some poetry around the world. And somehow I spent the last 15, 20 years working in advertising as a writer and a director of strategy, and also gathering some qualifications around applied psychology and sociology.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to be here. You know, I am, and I am driven
Can
by
I
the.
ask, can I ask about that? Why do you say you're lucky to be here? I mean, we're all lucky to be here, but I feel like there's a depth in that statement.
Because I've been in a few situations where, but for a freak of fate, I wouldn't have come out of it.
Right. Yeah. So you know what luck feels like, or fate, or something deeper.
Yeah, I
You're
mean,
supposed to be here.
I I don't believe in the randomness of luck. I do have a belief that we are held together by a web of something greater, and that things happen for a reason. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And so what lights your fire? What makes you tick right now in this life, in this space that you're in?
Well, there's so much, Sonia. I mean, from wild creatures, from the simple warmth and comfort of my dear old blind dog, to being with a horse, to being somewhere where nature can go about her business without interference, you know. Um, but in the last couple of decades, I really have become fascinated with the human condition. Particularly in the Western world, how easily we've let ourselves be ripped away from what runs in ourselves. From our connection and need for time outdoors, to feel the sun, to feel the wind, to feel the rain, to be cold, to be hot,
Mm.
um, to know that we belong to something other than just ourselves,
Yeah.
and also that we need each other.
Mhm.
We are a predominantly tribal animal, and
Mhm.
we are hardwired to work together, to hunt together, to look after each other. And I appreciate the realities of modern day life. I technology is a big part of my life. I understand what it's brought to us, but I also see what we're gradually losing, even without being aware that it's going. And that is this, it is the simple warmth, and in a physical sense, the mirror neurons, the neural impulses that fire when I meet somebody's eyes and see kinship. You know, it releases a different set of hormones. The adrenaline stops, my muscles relax. I lose my tension because I feel safe. And if I feel safe, I can begin to be creative and to give. I start to expand. Not
Right. So I wonder, what do you actually offer to the world now? So that's what lights your fire, that's what's behind you. What do you do in this world now?
excuse me.
So
Well,
you
I do a bunch of things, but what lights me up has been what I've been doing for the past 6 years, which is working within organizations, both businesses and public sector organizations, around helping them understand what conditions bring out the best in their human beings. What happens if our work actually becomes a developmental experience, if you like, an academy for life. And every organization that intentionally elevates the well-being of their people outperforms on every financial and human measure. So I do that. And I work with a team around me. We have worked in everything from large research companies to sheet steel companies to early childhood companies to a DHB.
Yeah.
We've got some proven methodologies, but every context is different. The beauty, I think, the paradox of being here is that whilst we're all the same on the outside, we're all unique on the inside.
Mm.
Yeah, we've got common drivers, we've got common needs and identity and validation and relatedness, but how we participate in that is very much driven by what shaped us, the conditioning and the experiences, um, the people and the absences.
Yeah, so you're talking there, you're speaking to my next question, which was the corporate space that you work in really
Mhm.
efficiently and the personal space. So I'm a somatic sexologist. I work with individuals and I also extend into the corporate space, but we keep them cleanly separate. But there's actually there's a the truth is that we are all individuals with very personal, private stories, and we step into the corporate space. And so I wonder, in your work, how personal do you get with your
um,
corporate people? Because we're all humans at the end of that corporate spectrum.
the answer is deeply, deeply personal, both within the work we do within group settings, but
Mm,
I've also gathered a portfolio of coaching clients.
mm,
And as you know, outside of work, I also have done a lot of work as part of men's societies. And there's been some really strong crossover. As a coach, I tend to coach leaders, but not only leaders. I sometimes get asked to help somebody who has simply lost their way, lost their mojo, lost their motivation.
mm,
And so I've I think developed some approaches that really, and they all start with the same thing: is who actually are you? Take away all the dressing, take away the posture, the title, the responsibilities, and let's go into what's left. What
mm,
do you hunger for? What are
mm,
your fears? What has brought you to this point? And I've been supported by some wonderful people in my life. I'd quote Mac McCartney, who's become a dear friend and a teacher who toured New Zealand last year. And there are a few others I can mention as well, like Mike Hutchison in Auckland and Tony Flying Bear Wasley, who's an incredibly wise man and part of my wider men's circle. And some women too who have had the patience to listen to this large, clumsy, blundering man and give me their wisdom. Because I don't believe we need to work separately, once we've done the work on ourselves, once we've worked out what is, I'm going to swear, what is my shit?
Mhm.
And until I deal with my shit, I don't actually have the space to love anybody else or lead anybody else. If I don't lead myself and love myself,
Mhm.
I'm operating under false pretenses.
Mm.
And
Mm.
this, you ask the question, this is what lights my fire,
Yeah. Yeah.
to help more men and women. I use the phrase come home to themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, I was going to offer the coronavirus mask that we're all being asked to wear exacerbates and reinforces our need for masks. And actually, what you and I talk about a lot is taking the masks away and taking
Yeah,
the shit away. Who are you underneath? What are you in your most simple, raw self? And then
yeah,
expand from there. So there's a lot of people out there who would go, I mean, for some people, men's work is part of their language, and for other people, it's a what? What is men's work? What do you do in these men's groups? Can you explain
um,
what that is?
well, I only have my experiences to talk from. I mean, well, the idea of men's work, I think, originally kind of started bubbling in the States in the 80s. And a man called Robert Bly, who's still alive, Robert Bly, I think he's a almost a mythological figure. He's a poet, a mythologist, a translator, and an author. And he began convening gatherings of men in the early 90s, and they were primal tribal affairs, driven by the beat of a drum. And probably a lot of the stereotypical images did happen. Men did gather round and weep and laugh and dance. Um, it's incredibly hard for a man who has not had the permission, either inside or outside, to expose his feelings to do that. And what Bly began to do was to create safe space for men to actually drop the mask. You
Mm,
know,
mhm,
I spent 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years pretending that this mask is me, but it's not. So that's where it began. And today there are a number of well-known societies like the Mankind Project that are aligned internationally. There's a number of ones in New Zealand that I've been part of. Um, and in many ways, it saved me. I got into it 20 odd years ago because I was pretty broken. I had walked away from my earlier life and all those experiences and what they left me with, and started a new life, and not brought any baggage, I thought, or any memories or any stories with me. Nobody knew what I'd spent the first 10 years of my adult life doing. And I thought I'd locked it away and I'd buried stuff in a hill in Wales, etc. And but it started to stir, and when my life took different turns, this stuff started to reappear. So I had to deal with it,
mhm,
and I fell into a group of men in the Coromandel, led by a visionary teacher called Sol Peterson, and that was my first exposure to actually being among a tribe of loving, open-hearted, bloody brave men. And a lot of this work, um, across all the different societies, is still drawn from Carl Jung's original archetypes. The warrior, the lover, the magician, and the king. And the men's societies have adapted this work. And there's a wonderful book by Douglas Gillette of the same title, which has become kind of a course book. And with all these experiences and these initiation rites of passage that men voluntarily put themselves through, even though it is hard, you know, it's a
mm,
chance to let out the pain, let out the shadow of not having had a present or functioning father or mother, of being abused, of not simply being nourished with touch and
Mhm,
kindness,
mhm.
or of being shamed,
Or of being conditioned to be a man who doesn't cry, who doesn't have emotions,
which,
no
yeah,
matter how hard or apparently easy our background, we can all find trauma through the process of becoming
yeah,
adults and finding our place in that. Yeah.
and that trauma is generational. Psychologists are finding that men and women are actually carrying and embodying the trauma of 2, 3 generations past. The
Or
deeper
some
the
say
trauma.
yeah.
Sorry, say again?
Some say 7 generations past.
Absolutely.
And so what we're clearing now, when we actually do our work and we stop, pause, remove the shit, the baggage, the whatever, become ourselves and heal, we're actually healing not only for ourselves but 7 generations ahead.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
rather like that too.
yeah.
Our responsibility now is quite massive when you think of that time frame.
And I have had 12 close male friends take their own lives,
Mm.
you know? So I'm driven to prevent more boys and men from harming themselves and the ripples that creates as well. So that's another thing that drives me.
So I lead women's adventures in heart opening, expansive, personal, collective journeys, and we renew, rewire, and rewild. So, this rewild business, how do you see rewilding? What do you mean by it?
That's a big one.
Yeah, we haven't got very long, so we'll keep it
I've
because I
touched.
want to get on to the
I think
adventures soon.
I think rewilding is a reawakening, a reclaiming of what lies in ourselves. And where the wildness lies is also where the wonder lies. It's putting aside the temporal priorities, the urgencies that actually aren't urgent, and going deeper. And the wild is both a great leveler and a great teacher.
Mhm.
I mean, we're sitting naked in a stream, we're all the same. You
Mm,
know,
yeah.
we're all there, we're all feeling, we're all experiencing, we're all absorbing.
What interests me too is that a lot of people fear the wild. A lot of people hear of rewild and they go, "Oh my god, you're going to go crazy!" Like that rewild has its own fear center as well, doesn't it? That we should be tame, domesticated animals, or
Wild is
humans. We're not animals.
the
So that
trigger
whole
word.
Mhm.
When I meet a woman or a man who is proud to have a wild side, I go, thank God. I've got these beautiful children. I want them to nurture and nourish their wild side. I mean, yeah, there are social boundaries and all of that kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
actually, I think to have that wild side is to remember where we came from and what we are.
To be simple and to feel and to allow our emotions and to actually be humans,
Yeah,
without the containment of domestication. I'm
yeah, absolutely.
wondering, I'm going to segue a little bit back into the adventures, or did we talk about adventures in the beginning? So I run adventures, and what I'm imagining and our co-creating is actually running you and I running an adventure together. But but so I run women's adventures, and I can't really imagine inviting you to one of those. I don't really think that the women on that journey would appreciate a man's presence. Um, and and so, am I actually being pretty arrogant to suggest that you and I could run a man's adventure or something?
Well,
Maybe we can't. Maybe the men wouldn't come.
the idea has intrigued me since you mentioned it. I do think that men, and this is again from a purely male and possibly ignorant perspective, I think men and women are on different journeys. But as you know, I think it's actually not just time, but the world needs us to come together, you
Mm,
know. And once again, remember the power of co-creation, the noble masculine and the sacred feminine. And I believe a part of that is opening up the structures to what you're talking about. And I suspect for both men and women, what's required first and foremost is a degree of safety, you know, psychological, emotional, physical safety.
mhm,
Um, Once that container is established, my experience of particularly young men today, I've got a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son as well as an older, and I actually think their relationships across the genders are far healthier than ours were at that point, you know. So I do actually think there is an opportunity for men to open up to women, and having a woman on that journey could be immensely powerful. I think there is I think there is an unlocking to a man and to men that can only come through the sacred feminine. It's a channel. It's a channel. I mean, I've heard the phrase. I think it's a Cherokee proverb that a woman's role is to lead a man safely to source. And whenever blokes get together, even in a sacred sense, we have to spend the first few hours wading through what again the swinging dicks, the competitiveness that males inevitably bring to a situation. Once we get through that, we sometimes access the softer stuff, the real stuff. And I think that within that journey, it would be amazingly powerful to engage with wise, compassionate womanhood. There's your answer.
beautiful. Yeah, I'm with you on that, and just feeling it. Actually, it feels like a right time to just pause and take a breath. Like that feels like that's a nugget of gold, what you just expressed there. And in co creating something, being able to pause and recognize the gold when we meet it feels really important. And I think as we extend into the planet, the world, humanity is changing, we are evolving, and those pauses to collect the nuggets of gold and remember what we're going to practice going forward, I think are really key pieces. So I feel that in my sternum, in my bones, in the bones, honey. So
And I want to say, I think it goes the other way as well. I think the time is right,
mhm.
perhaps, for men to learn how to sit in front of women.
Mm. Yeah, lovely. And I would love, I started this saying I'm running women's adventures, and I'm not going to be inviting you anytime right now, Jeremy. But I do think there will be a time, and I run couples adventures, but those are kind of different. There will be a time when actually we can collectively, women's adventures doing their work and men's adventures doing their work, kind of together, separately together, and that union just gently coming together, not necessarily in relationship, but in humanity. And there's plenty of collective work going on doing exactly that. But what I envisage is something slow, slow, the slow dance, the long walk, the journey together feels
I,
important.
I agree, and I only thought of it in in a social sense, not an intimate sense. But I'm also experimenting and doing some work with some of my business colleagues around the same context, actually in business leadership. You know, there is there are differences in how women lead and men lead. Neither is better, but there are differences, and the differences go deep.
Mhm.
And I do believe that magic would happen if
Mm.
we can learn to lead in partnership, in
Yeah,
open, honest partnership.
yeah, yeah. And in different skills that the masculine and the feminine, the male, the female bring, we are actually physically, neurologically wired differently. But we can rewire, we can retrain, and we can learn from each other. And male from female, female from male. So I think that's really, really powerful. Um, yeah, I wonder. We talk about nature as well. So adventure to me is about being in nature. We talk about rewilding, adventure. Some people like to retreat. I prefer to call it going on an adventure because we're advancing forward. Retreat is kind of a regression that
Yeah,
when we come back to life, a retreat is kind of like a holiday that was gone. And adventure and advancement is something that we and it's something we go on and we collect nuggets of gold from, and it changes our future. So we take an adventure home with us. That's my kind of like, that's why it's important. And so we're going into nature, we're collecting skills, nuggets of gold, practices that change the way we behave and interact and work. Um, and so, yeah, so you and I both feel renewed in time in nature. And so remember that
absolutely.
meditation where I led you and we sat by a creek and you sat next to your younger self.
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful connection. I really enjoyed that meditation together. So why do you think nature brings such insight and healing to us? How does it do that?
Well, firstly, excuse me, science knows that being in nature has a discernible effect on our physiology, on our brain behavior and on how our body responds to our environment. And science has also proven that if we're ripped out of nature, we experience suffering. You know, the behavior, the underlying patterns of people who live in concrete jungles is different to people who can walk upon the ground every day. So
Mhm.
that's the first thing. And also, I think it's simplicity. You know, we've created a life for ourselves, which is composed of layer upon layer upon layer of distraction and obligation. And so much of that is illusory. You know, we allow ourselves to be distracted. We allow ourselves to believe the obligations are obligations, but we don't actually need any of that stuff to the same degree that we need to breathe the air, to be in the water, to be close to plants. I mean, I've got some wonderfully wise friends who channel the power of nature in a healing sense. The essence of our plants. We know that trees communicate. Trees give off an essence to us.
Yeah. And actually, we are nature, aren't we?
We are.
And if we separate ourselves from it and we think we're not, then that's illusory. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that fascinates me is again, they did an experiment in the States last year to see what happens when people walk barefoot in the forest. You know, and the brain just lights up. It's like a bloody Christmas tree
Mhm.
because we've got these feet with thousands upon thousands of sensory receptors, and we stuff them into shoes with inch thick soles, and we deprive ourselves of this amazing sensory experience that is bare feet.
Yes, I totally hear you. And I'm so looking forward to you reading your poem at the end of this.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But
Um,
before we go to the poem, I want to ask you, because we've got 5 minutes before we close it. So
okay.
I want to ask you if you've got three key statements you want to offer to people listening to this not a podcast, it's a live.
I'd like to say here's to I prepared earlier, but I've had a very quick think, and it's not hard for me to jump on those. The first one is each of us becomes who we choose to become. You know, even if we're born to unbearable hardship, we have a degree of leverage over how we come to that day by day. And regardless, I guess, of beliefs on incarnations and multiple lives, in this mortal coil, in this body, I only have one go. You know, so let's make it conscious. Let's switch on. Let's receive. Let's give. Let's accept the gifts from nature and the gifts from each other. Second relates to that.
With one.
You know, we are one. We are all one. There you go. I'll stop there.
Great. Beautiful. Beautiful. I do like that we are one. I lead a little meditation at the moment quite often where I guide people into noticing gravity through the body. So if you notice gravity, the line through your body right now, and envisage that going all the way to the center of the earth and then all the way back out again from me to you and to everybody else watching this and everybody else on the planet, that one point that we all are directed to reinforces that we are one statement that you just made. So I love that. Thank you.
I guess I don't know if that's enough about that.
So Jeremy, this poem of yours called Ground, would you read it to us or recite it if it's in your mind?
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Let me just wet my throat. Take off your shoes. Take off your shoes and go walk the ground. Notice each texture and ask not why. Rough does not need your permission, nor smooth your blessing. Each has its own language for your feet to interpret. Do not shy from hard, nor linger long upon soft. Accept all under your feet. Be guided into the story they tell. Then let your feet compose. Let your feet compose. Take off your shoes, unblock your ears. The ground will sing to you. Become its chorus, and you too will have a song to sing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sonia.
So Jeremy, we will write up our contact details in the post after this. I think that's a really lovely way to just go complete. Thank you for nuggets of gold today. Let's see what happens next.
Thank you.
Thank you.